Homage to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. Today we're looking at the Paloka Sutta. This is Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 3, discourse number 56. And a Brahmin comes to the Buddha and has a question about depopulation. So he says to the Buddha, Master Gautama, I've heard older Brahmins who are aged, burdened with years, teachers of teachers, saying, in the past this world was so thickly populated, one would think there was no space between people. The villages, towns, and capital cities were so close that cocks could fly between them. Why is it, Master Gautama, that at present the number of people has declined, depopulation is seen, and villages, towns, cities, and districts have vanished? So this particular sutta is quite topical and interesting for our current times when people talk about the world being overpopulated, and also where there are many theories and concerns about depopulation for one reason or another. So let's look at the Buddha's answer to this Brahmin's question. For each reason, the Buddha starts by saying, at present, Brahmin, people are excited by illicit lust, overcome by rapacious greed, afflicted by wrong Dhamma. So before we go into the specific reasons, let's look at these different terms that the Buddha is referring to. So the first one is adhamma raga rata. So adhamma translates as unrighteous, unjust, and raga translates as passion or lust, uncontrolled excitement, infatuation, greed, attachment. Rata translates as being excited or attached to, finding pleasure in. So the way that this has been translated is excited by illicit lust, adhamma raga rata. But it could also be translated as uncontrolled passion, misconduct affected by lust. But you can see where that is coming from. And then the second term is visama loba abhibhutta. So visama normally means unequal, uneven, and so that's where you get the rapacious from. Loba, of course, is greed, so that's where you get rapacious greed. And then the next term is miccha dhamma pareta. So miccha dhamma means wrong or false dhamma, and then pareta means that you're afflicted by it or overcome by it. You've gone with it. So therefore, that's how you get to illicit lust, overcome by rapacious greed, and afflicted by the wrong Dhamma, the wrong kinds of teaching. Now, examples of illicit lust, just so we get a clear idea. So this is clearly around being greedy, maybe for multiple partners, other people's wives, going for younger partners, cheating, adultery can come from this. Other kinds of sexual misconduct, rape, assault, pedophilia, human trafficking, the excessiveness towards sex, maybe even sexual deviancy, perversion. And then when it comes to overcome by rapacious greed, well, the individual one is quite obvious. When we do anything that is erring on the side of selfishness or stinginess, but at a larger scale, you can see it when businesses start stockpiling and then they create shortages in the market, and then they release it to the market only at higher prices, or when people short sell on the stock market, or when people profit during a global disaster or pandemic, or when there's massive corruption when you're in a position of power or authority, whether it's in business or government. Any kind of defrauding, insider trading, maybe even inventing and hyping certain things and creating fear around things and then selling off when the price goes up. And then examples of wrong Dhamma, really in a nutshell, it's when one doesn't understand karma and rebirth. So you don't recognize the importance of morality, generosity, and wholesome qualities. When you go with the wrong teaching, what happens is you have the idea that it's okay, there are no ramifications. And so you're led by greed, hatred, and delusion. So what the Buddha is overlaying as part of explaining the reasons for depopulation is it's driven by greed, hatred, and delusion. Another way of us understanding the Buddha's reference to people being driven by illicit lust, rapacious greed, and the wrong teachings is in our session on the Mahasupina Jatika, where we went through the 16 great dreams or nightmares of King Pasenadi of Kosala and the Buddha's explanation of these dreams. And in his explanation, he's talking about the future world where it has sunken into decline or ruin as a result of selfish or weak leaders, corrupt judges, raising the voices of the foolish rather than the wise, having misconduct, mistreatment of elders, shameless behavior, unrighteousness, greed, shameless monastics, all those different kinds of things that the Buddha explained. When those exist, the world falls, declines. And so this is the context upon which the Buddha is referencing his answer to the Brahmin when he's being asked about depopulation. When the world slides into ruin or decline, what is missing is the bright protectors of the world. And the Buddha has this teaching in the Itivuttaka, and it says, Bhikkhus, these two bright principles protect the world. What are the two? Moral shame and fear of wrongdoing. If, Bhikkhus, these two bright principles did not protect the world, there would not be discerned respect for mother, or maternal aunt, or maternal uncle's wife, or a teacher's wife, or the wives of other honored persons, and the world would have fallen into promiscuity, as with goats, sheep, chickens, pigs, dogs, and jackals. But as these two bright principles protect the world, there is discerned respect for mother, or maternal aunt, or maternal uncle's wife, or a teacher's wife, or the wives of other honored persons. So with this particular teaching of the Buddha, what's evident is moral shame and fear of wronging are what protects us from doing wrong things. The Buddha also says, those in whom shame and fear of wrong are not consistently found have deviated from the bright root and are led back to birth and death. And those in whom shame and fear of wrong are consistently ever present, peaceful, mature in the spiritual life, they put an end to the renewal of being. So when we look at this, we can see that these bright protectors, moral shame and fear of wrongdoing, they extend to all other aspects of civil society. It's not simply just about promiscuity and sexual misconduct. They can extend to other aspects of our lives. When they are there, they actually help us to prevent us from doing wrong, to break precepts, to harm one another. And so when you look at the Buddha's teaching on this, you see that in the suttas, he also calls them trainee powers, seka bala. And these are the things that protect and prevent from pursuing greed, hatred, and delusion. They protect us from negligence or heedlessness. When we have activated moral shame and fear of wrongdoing, what we do is we consider the moral ramifications. What is the karma? What is the result if we do this or that? Do we harm people if we do this particular kind of speech or take this kind of physical action or think this particular thing? What is our intention? Moral shame and fear of wrongdoing make us reconsider being reckless, around our body, speech, and mind. And so when we are protected by moral shame and fear of wrongdoing, then it is good for us and it is also good for other people. It's good for the world. So the world would not be in a state of decline if these two things are there. Now, when there is illicit lust, rapacious greed, and following a different teaching other than this one, where we don't consider karma and rebirth, then anything is possible. And this is what we are seeing in the world. Where there's the prevalence of the wrong view, then the world can go directly to ruin. With that in mind, let's go through the Buddha's reasons that he gives the Brahmin. So the first thing that the Buddha says is, at present, Brahmin, people are excited by illicit lust, overcome by rapacious greed, afflicted by wrong Dhamma. As a result, they take up weapons and slay one another. Hence, when people die, this is a reason why at present the number of people has declined, depopulation is seen, and villages, towns, cities, and districts have vanished. So we can observe in today's world that depopulation does result from people taking up weapons and slaying one another. All we have to do is look at the news headlines. killing happens every day, from small incidents to large-scale wars. There are news items about people waiting in line for fuel at the petrol station and someone knifes another person and that person dies. Or there's an armed robbery and people are shot. Or a father is rageful over family issues and kills his wife and kids. Or there's brawling at a sports event and people die after fighting. Or there's other instances where there's a school shooting incident. Or there's a large mob of people lynching and then killing a person over taking offense over something. Or a jealous wife ends up shooting her husband and his mistress. Or a businessman hires an assassin to murder a competitor. Or there's a terrorist setting off a bomb in a public place. Or there's a prison riot and people end up being killed. Or there are leaders or politicians sending troops in to battle for territory and power over some dispute. So we can see that depopulation, it doesn't have to be some kind of conspiracy. It can be simply that people, out of greed, hatred, and delusion, take up arms and kill each other. If we remind ourselves about the results of bad actions that the Buddha speaks about, so if we go to the Ducharita Vipaka Sutta, this is Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 8, discourse number 40. The Buddha talks about, in this particular sutta, the killing of living beings, taking what is not given, sexual misconduct, and the 4 kinds of wrong speech. So false speech, lying, divisive speech, harsh speech, frivolous speech, and of course the last one being the drinking of alcohol. So the worst case scenario that the Buddha talks about, that if we repeatedly pursue, develop and practice these things, it's conducive to rebirth in hell, the animal realm, and the hungry ghost realm. And more specifically, when it comes to the killing of living beings, if we're reborn as human beings, at a minimum, it leads to short lifespan. And another one is if we continue to take what is not given, whether it is to each other, or if we keep plundering the earth and the ocean for minerals, for sea life, for all kinds of things, even sand, if we continue to keep plundering it for sand, for rock, then the Buddha says there is loss of wealth. And we don't see certain things like bad decisions we make from when we are drinking alcohol, when we're intoxicated. So we know that this world is imbued with the idea that it's great to drink alcohol, to become heedless, and we don't see that there is a negligence that arises when we drink. So the worst kinds of decisions can come. And if we're reborn as a human being, at a minimum, it leads to mental derangement or madness. Essentially, the worst decisions we can make come when the mind is like that, either intoxicated with alcohol, or we are born with some kind of madness or mental derangement. So those decisions could be around harming each other, harming the earth, not caring about certain important things for one's own well-being, for another person's well-being, for the well-being of the world. So those are a few examples. Then the Buddha goes into the second reason that there is depopulation. And he says to the Brahmin, again, at present, people are excited by illicit lust, overcome by rapacious greed, afflicted by wrong Dhamma. When this happens, sufficient rain does not fall. As a result, there is a famine, a scarcity of grain. The crops become blighted and turn to straw. Hence many people die. This is another reason why at present the number of people has declined. Depopulation is seen, and villages, towns, cities and districts have vanished. So this is very much when the evil or bad things in the world really take hold, illicit lust, rapacious greed, believing the wrong Dhamma. When greed, hatred and delusion, which effectively means that people are cultivating the unwholesome through body, speech and mind, that there is killing, there is stealing, there is misconduct, there is all kinds of bad speech, there is covetousness, there is ill will, and there is wrong view. When all those things are there, what the Buddha is saying, sufficient rain does not fall. And then as a result of that, there is famine, scarcity of grain, crops become blighted and turn to straw. When people don't get enough food to feed the population, people go hungry. And eventually, if they can't find food, they will die. So we've already seen this across many countries that suffer from severe drought. We also see when they don't receive enough food aid from countries that have abundance, populations decline. Now, the really interesting thing about this is around one's virtue. When we live an unvirtuous life, when there is so much immorality, when it escalates, Buddha is saying we will experience drought. When there is drought, there will be famine, and therefore there is depopulation. So we can already see this in the world, and we can see it coming. There are so many countries now experiencing drought, and it doesn't really matter whether you believe somebody is manipulating the weather or whether it's something to do with climate change. In effect, when you look at the Buddha's teaching, he's giving us something that is far more superior, far more empowering. Quite often when it comes to the reasons or the kind of questions that we have and the answers that we seek out when it comes to depopulation, we're looking for something out there. And of course we're going to find something. There are corrupt leaders, there are selfish leaders, there are weak leaders. There are also groups of people that are increasingly corrupt. Corrupt business people, corrupt businesses, people who are pretending to be altruistic, but really they're quite deceitful, quite corrupt, only out for selfish gains. When you look at that, it's disempowering to always point out there. It's somebody else, it's that group, it's that leader, it's that person. You get very disenfranchised when you keep pointing out there. What we really need to do is really look at this Buddha's teaching and see what part do we play in this? How are we contributing to these difficult conditions? And when you read this correctly, when you penetrate this Dhamma correctly, you see that Buddha keeps saying illicit lust, rapacious greed, afflicted by wrong Dhamma. And when you're afflicted by all those things, you are not in the wholesome. You are practicing unskillful behavior, unwholesome behavior. So what can we do about it? What is quite empowering about this teaching is that if we rein it in, if we don't go with the illicit lust, if we are not overcome by the rapacious greed, we start being more generous. We start having less ill will towards others, not wanting to harm others, and to maintain some sort of virtue in the world. Then maybe rain will start to fall as it is needed, so that it doesn't result in food emergencies, food shortages, and ultimately famine. So this is the second reason that Buddha gives for depopulation. And then the third reason that the Buddha gives to the Brahmin is, again, at present people are excited by illicit lust, overcome by rapacious greed, afflicted by wrong Dhamma. When this happens, the yakas release wild spirits, hence many people die. This is yet another reason why at present the number of people has declined. Depopulation is seen, and villages, towns, cities and districts have vanished. So this one is around wild spirits released by the yakas. So the yakas are again, they're non-human beings that do come under the control of the four great kings. However, there are yakas who are uncontrollable. And when you look at this, the most helpful sutta is really the Athanatya Sutta. It's in the longer discourses, and it talks about the great protection that is given by the four great kings to those that are part of the fourfold Sangha. So if you are a monastic or a layperson who is considered a disciple of the Buddha, who keeps the precepts, who is walking the Noble Eightfold Path, then there is a certain protection that can be chanted in order to be protected by these wild spirits released by yakas and other challenges that come to the world. Now, when it comes to the release of wild spirits, how can we understand this? It's when we get mentally afflicted, when we can come under the control of other non-humans. And so when you don't keep particular precepts, when you're immoral, when you're driven by this illicit lust, rapacious greed, wrong Dhamma, then you can be vulnerable to these things. And really, when you think about devas and other non-humans who want to protect people in the world, they don't necessarily want to protect those who are immoral and impure. So the takeaway from this is that it's very important, like with all the other reasons, is to be virtuous, to stay on the side of wholesome behavior through body, speech and mind, that which is skillful, that which doesn't harm ourselves or harm others. If we really want to know what leads to affliction, so in this particular case, the affliction of depopulation, the Buddha has a number of teachings, and one of them is Atta Bhiyabhada Sutta, and this is Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 3, discourse number 17. The Buddha says to the monks, bhikkhus, these three qualities lead to one's own affliction, the affliction of others and the affliction of both. What three? Bodily misconduct, verbal misconduct, and mental misconduct. These three qualities lead to one's own affliction, the affliction of others, and the affliction of both. These three other qualities do not lead to one's own affliction, the affliction of others, and the affliction of both. What three? Bodily good conduct, verbal good conduct, and mental good conduct. These three qualities do not lead to one's own affliction, the affliction of others, and the affliction of both. So this is a very straightforward teaching of the Buddha, something that is quite clear when it comes to affliction in the world. If we all start to behave in accordance with the Buddha's teachings, one can see something such as depopulation would not exist, would not afflict us. But as the world is in decline, it is not following the Buddha's teachings, then we can see what is happening in the world. To round off this teaching, it's good to apply this other teaching by the Buddha where he talks about when we are overcome by lust, hatred and delusion. What he says about lust, hatred and delusion is that when we are excited by lust, overcome by lust, with mind obsessed by it, intends for his own affliction, for the affliction of others, and for the affliction of both, and he experiences mental suffering and sadness. And so the Buddha then says the same thing of when we are full of hate, overcome by hatred, and with a mind obsessed by hate, then we intend again for our own affliction, for the affliction of others, and for the affliction of both, and so we experience mental suffering and sadness. And the same again for delusion. One who is deluded, overcome by delusion, with mind obsessed by delusion, intends for his own affliction, for the affliction of others, and for the affliction of both, and he experiences mental suffering and sadness. So the thing to see here is when we are afflicted in this way, we hurt ourselves, we harm others, and we harm both. So that is what is happening in the world when we're driven by illicit lust, rapacious greed, and the wrong view. That is all that can be expected. And so depopulation happens because all these things lead to unwholesome behavior. And this is what affects the world. So when you are able to abandon the lust, when you see it for yourself that it is very important to abandon the lust, abandon the hatred, abandon the delusion, when we correct our view in this way by going through such a teaching of the Buddha, when we know that there are repercussions for bad behavior, unwholesome behavior, that we need to rein it in, to cut it off at its root, not intend to hurt ourselves or hurt others, hurt the world, then this is how we can actually help the situation. So this is a particularly empowering thing, because most often when we accuse others of, you're the ones that are doing all of this, it's all your fault, and we blame, we don't realize our part of it. When we come into the world and we continue to walk this path of greed, hatred and delusion, we are contributing to the downfall of the world. If we start walking the Noble Eightfold Path, developing the Noble Eightfold Path, know that we are developing it through body, speech and mind, through the right view, the right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, make the right effort, apply the right mindfulness, and of course come to the right concentration. This is how we overcome the lust, hatred and delusion. This is how we heal the world. So any fear that people have over depopulation due to other people doing things, the most empowering thing about this teaching is we need to do our part. We need to change our behavior. Otherwise, all of these things will come true. All of the reasons why there is depopulation will come true. The encouragement is to take what is useful, but certainly contemplate the Buddha's words, penetrate them directly for yourself, and we can end our session here. Let's share the merit with all sentient beings. May all beings be happy and well. May all beings be free from suffering. Blessings of the Triple Gem, wishing you well. Teruvan Saranai.